back at Temple Micah. It's not really being back, but we have spent more and more time with our kids in Beacon, New York, and so haven't been coming into Washington nearly as much as we used to. But we've been here for 47, 48 years. When I came to Temple Micah, Sid Booth was the president. And, but it's just wonderful to see so many friends over, believe it or not, 5 decades. When I was asked to do this, and we talked about 4 or 5 months ago about what a topic would be, I was trying to figure out what could something be, that would be provocative be. So I said, why don't we talk about whether the Democrats could create a path for Trump's reelection? And lo and behold, that's not the conventional wisdom. But so what I thought I'd do today is very, hopefully briefly, go through some numbers, sort of explain what we face and in this election. Before people get all depressed, let me tell you, the Democrats are going to win this election. In 2018, despite the Republican gerrymandering, we had the biggest midterm election victory in the history of the country in terms of vote. And so what we need to do is do it again. And as you'll see, it's one of the reasons I think we ought to listen to one of my long-term sort of adversaries of Democratic Party politics, Nancy Pelosi, who I've come to respect and believe that she really has the best interests of our party in mind. The other thing I'll say is bear with me. I used to have a big staff who knew how to do all the, graphics and stuff. This is me on my laptop in the last 2 days. So,
wait a minute,
is there a
Al.
buzz?
Wait a, yeah.
If it's better, I'll.
He's gonna fix it.
Al, if you just stand closer to your computer.
Okay. Is that better?
Yes.
And when
Okay.
you get close to the speaker, you get feedback.
All right, so my topic is, will the Democrats create a path for reelection for Donald Trump? Or well, to me, we have one major challenge. The singular goal of our party ought to be to beat Trump. But the challenge is to nominate a candidate who can come out of the primaries in a way that he or she will not be compromised to Trump. And that's harder than it may appear. Let me just give you a couple of numbers. What I want to do is show you the path that Trump would have to use, and then we'll talk about how we'll close it. Obviously, Hillary Clinton in 2016 won the 2-party vote. But if you take out 3 states, California, you just take out California, but Massachusetts and New York, where Democrats win so overwhelmingly, in the other 47 states, Trump won by 3.5 million votes. And just to give you a sense on percentages, he won by over 3.5%, for about 3.5% in those other 47 states. And remember, presidential elections are state-by-state contests. You add up the electoral votes, so this is not unimportant. Let's look at the map just quickly. So where do the Democrats control the coast? A couple of states in the Midwest, and Colorado and New Mexico, which have very large Latino populations. I'm going to give you a couple of key demographics, but let's go back there for a minute. I'll get there yet. Let's take a quick look. Here is these states from Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, with Florida, are the states that voted for Obama and then voted for Trump. through that was his path to election, and that's what we have to apply, his path for reelection. Florida's sort of an anomaly, but they used to call this the blue wall. But in reality, it's never been a blue wall, because Reagan won it, won all of those states twice, and George H.W. Bush won, I think, won all of those but Wisconsin in 1988, so it's never been quite a blue wall. I'm just going to point out a couple of categories, and then you'll see why I'm doing it in a minute. Here, you see where Trump's strongest. Those are the places in red. Older voters, white voters, and particularly white men. He won white men by 2-1. Now, let's look at these states. They didn't do exit polls on Massachusetts, so I couldn't use Massachusetts, but in the states that Hillary won big, it's pretty much the national average. But look at the age, the percentage of voters who are over 45 in these other states. They're older, they're whiter, except for Florida. We're going to keep Florida as sort of an anomaly because it's such a mixed mash of people coming in and out. And more male, so there are more old white men in those states, a better electorate for Trump. That's why he won those states. Again, let's look at education has become a very important new divider in American politics, what income used to be. But again, look at where Trump is strong. Whites with no college and white no college men. He won those, can you believe that, 71-16, and they're 16% of the electorate, not insignificant. Again, look at these states. White no college. Every one of them, with the exception of Florida, has more white people with no college than the national average. Every one of them, with the exception of Florida again. And one of the reasons Florida has so few white people is because Florida, like California, has a lower percentage of white voters overall. California, you say, well, why would California only have 9%? That's because only 48% of the voters overall in California are white. But so again, these states are states that are built for Trump. I won't pay much attention to the ideology, except that the only thing I want to point out is the country is 26% liberal, and we'll see how as we get into the primaries that makes a difference. Really, these states on ideology, with the exception of Ohio, which is turned Republican, in Iowa, which is a much more rural state, are basically not are not much different than the national average. Okay, now here are 5 things that I think we ought to remember as we go into the primaries. This is how you beat. First, the primary electorate, and this is particularly true with today's polarization, is very different than the general election electorate. Second, and this might be hard to believe for people who watch cable TV, but the Democrats on Twitter don't reflect the views of most Democrats. Third, and this, if I had to say, the most important thing in the whole deal, is we need to make the 2020 election a referendum on Donald Trump. If we do that, we will win, and we will win big. If we allow him to turn it into a contest between him and a candidate he can beat up on, then we can have the same kind of problems we had last time. That's why it's important for our candidates to avoid taking positions in primaries that will run off the voters we need to win in November. And finally, we need to pay attention to Nancy Pelosi. She put together a winning coalition and a winning strategy in 2018, and she has her eyes on the prize in 2020, which is winning the White House and keeping the House. Now, and we'll talk a little bit about these points. The Democratic primary electorate, and I want to say that, you know, since we haven't had a primary in 2020, we don't really know who's going to vote yet. But just based on past history and some really good analyses I've read, I can make these basic judgments. And I'm gonna go back here. And here is what I'd say. Did I just turn that off? No, didn't turn it on. Anyway, the primary electorate is 46% liberal. It's about twice as liberal as the general population. Now, the thing about that is, the loudest voices in the party are the liberals, and the people, the left-leaning people. So they try to define it. I don't know if you saw in the day's New York Times, I think it was, there was a piece on the fight between AOC and Nancy Pelosi. You know, what Pelosi says, and she's right, I've run the Democratic caucus in the House, that's part of my past history, is AOC and her, whatever they call it, the squad, has 4 votes, and that's what they have. And as we'll see when we go into a little bit about the 2018 election, we'll see that that's really about it, that they really weren't very successful in 2018 either. But in any event, we're losing white voters. You can go from 2008 to 2016 and 2020 to be more, and we're particularly hemorrhaging white working class voters. About 25% of the primary electorate is African American, and that's growing. And let me just explain to you what that means as you get into the primaries. Many of you know that I was one of the early people with President Bill Clinton, and we had what a lot of people call a Bubba strategy, which is after New Hampshire and Iowa, we're going to win the southern states. And Bill Clinton had this ability that no candidate since Robert Kennedy, and really no candidate since, maybe Obama to a degree, but not quite to the degree Clinton had the ability to put together a coalition of working class whites and African Americans. And well, the reason that was important in '92 is because, believe it or not, there were not enough Latinos voting in '92 to register in the exit polls. So the only minority in '92 was African Americans. But so Bill Clinton ran a Bubba strategy in the primaries, and he won all those southern states on Super Tuesday, and that catapulted him to the nomination. Hillary Clinton ran a Bubba strategy too in 2016, and that catapulted her to the nomination, but she didn't get any Bubba votes because there were no Bubba votes still in the Democratic Party. All the white Bubbas left, and she won with the enormous African American votes in states like South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, states which we are not going to win in the general election. But the point is that if you look at, you know, just to continue on real quickly, the biggest gains in Democratic primary electorate in the Democratic Party are white women, and particularly highly educated college graduates, postgraduate white women. And for those of you who worry about Joe Biden, and you should, believe it or not, even this time, it's projected that 3/5 of the Democratic primary electorate is going to be over 45. The 2 most important constituencies in the Democratic primaries are highly educated white women who tend to be liberal, and African Americans who tend to be more moderate. And but I say this not as a value judgment, but as a political reality. When you have constituencies that are twice as important in the primaries as they are in the general, you wind up having the candidates, unless the candidate has extraordinary amount of self-confidence, the ability that he or she can convince people of his or her point of view, tailoring their message to those constituencies in a way that they may have to explain in the general election, and it makes the road harder. So, I said the Democratic electorate is different than the Twitter electorate, and just to give you an idea, Nate Cohn and Kevin Quealy had a piece in the New York Times based on a study that I think it was called, what it's called, Hidden Tribes Project, which is does analysis of the electorate. And here's what you see. Much more highly educated on Twitter. 47% have a college degree, 33% of other Democrats do. They're likely to be white. 71% of Twitter Democrats are white, only 55% of other Democrats. They're much more likely to be become more liberal in their lifetime. That they say they're 4 times as likely to have attended a protest in the last year, and they're 3 times as likely to have given to a political donated money. Democrats who are not on social media are about twice as likely to be conservative or moderate as social media Democrats. This is an important one when you're dealing with President Trump. 70% of other Democrats think political correctness is a problem in our country, but only half or 48% of Twitter Democrats. You know, by 2 to 1, other Democrats don't follow the news much. And again, just much higher African American or much higher African American constituency that is not on Twitter. This is just a quote that you don't have to read by Jonathan Chait, who's the political writer for New York Magazine, and he sort of reflects what a number of columnists, including Richard Cohen yesterday in the Post, David Brooks, others have said. David Brooks said, there's no way in the world I'd ever vote for Donald Trump, but please let me have a candidate I can vote for. And you could come out of those debates believing that the Democrats wanted to eliminate all private health insurance, that they wanted everything to be free. I believe we should banish, when it's talking about benefits, we should banish the word free from our lexicon. I mean, we don't have to be uncaring and disregard everybody like the Republicans, but most Americans think there's no free lunch and no something for nothing. There's a lot of talk about immigration, and Lord knows it's a big problem. Incidentally, it's always been a problem. Some of us are old enough to remember when, or at least in reading the history books, when Jews from Europe were turned around in American ports. So this isn't quite as the problem, this new problem was a thing. But the idea of decriminalizing the borders, making open borders, as Jonathan Chait said back here, where are we here? They're just making campaign ads for Donald Trump. I also personally believe we have to be very careful on how we deal with business. Everybody likes to beat up on corporations, but most people work for businesses. And they get their income from businesses. They get their health insurance from businesses. So we just have to be careful. It doesn't mean you can't go after the bad actors. It doesn't mean you can't fight for what you believe. But you just got to do it in a way that doesn't run off people. So let's look just at what happened in 2018. We had the most diverse class ever. More women, people of color, veterans, LGBT candidates, and the moderates won those swing districts. 33 of the 42 seats that switched from red to blue were won by the New Democrat Coalition or New Democrat PAC, whatever it is. But that's the group that we started out of the Clinton campaign in 1991 in the House. Candidates endorsed by the left-leaning organizations like our Revolution and Justice Democrats, they elected, no question, they elected their 4 people in safe Democratic districts that didn't flip 1 seat. And how do you become a majority when the Republicans have it? Yeah, you become a majority by flipping seats. So you got it. That's why I say we need to pay attention to Nancy Pelosi. She's trying to protect those candidates who are going to be progressive 90% of the time. They're going to be with the most liberal people in our party on almost everything. But there's some things where they may not be. But they're going to be a hell of a lot better than the Republicans they replaced. And Nancy's trying to protect them, and she's trying to, I lived through the Clinton impeachment. And it was not a fun time. But I'll tell you what, Clinton jujitsu'd that on the Republicans unbelievably. And Donald Trump, he's a bully. I don't think there's a good character in his, or bone in his character, but we can't give him any opportunities to beat us over the head with an argument that we're just going to have a political impeachment, which is not going to go anywhere anyway, because until we get a new Senate, there's no chance. So here's what I do, and but of course I'm old and I've been around too long, and I don't talk to people. I don't talk as much to people who are running. But I think the most important thing for a Democrat who wants to win this time is, first of all, honor our core principles, but also tell people what they are. And what do I think they are? Opportunity for all. That's been the credo of the party since Andrew Jackson. Jack Kennedy's ethic of civic responsibility, asking people to give something back. The tough internationalism of Harry Truman, the thirst for innovation of Franklin Roosevelt. If something doesn't work, you try something else. The fight for social justice of LBJ. Those are the principles, and we ought to be proud of them. My second point is we need to be concerned about growing the private economy. Private sector economic growth is the prerequisite for opportunity for all. When I grew up in Indiana, if you wanted to get ahead, you were a Democrat. And my point is that at our best, we're a party of upward mobility. You can't be a party of upward mobility unless you grow the private economy. And that means policies that help grow the economy, but it also means, in this day and age, making sure that we make the human investments to assure that everyone has the tools and the abilities to succeed in a new economy to the best of his or her ability. I have my own prejudices about what are the best things, but to be honest with you, I'll just give you one of them. I am chagrined to see so many Democratic candidates come out against charter schools. And they're doing it because the teachers' unions haven't been able to organize them, even though charter schools in cities like New Orleans, Washington, D.C., Chicago have been the best thing that's happened to public education for low-income people in the last 25 years. But that's an aside. We have to remember the forgotten middle class. We're not going to win working class white voters. We don't do very well with working class voters anywhere. But one of the strategies in winning elections is cutting your losses. It's different to lose them by 25 or 30 points than to lose them by 10. If you lose them by 10, then you can make up that ground. If you lose them by 25 or 30, then you have this problem in Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. Fourth, And this is something that is personally, I think, is really important, and most Democrats don't tend to think about it. We need to be the party of reform. Unlike the Republicans, we believe in government. We believe it's the agents to push forward the common good. So if government doesn't work, it's our constituencies that pay. We ought to be the ones that, you know, I once worked for a man, some of you may remember, named Ed Muskie, and he gave a famous speech to the Liberal Party in New York where he said, "What's so damn liberal about wasting money?" Pretty good question to me. So I believe we ought to try to reform government. You don't see any reform talk in these primaries. You know, when Bill Clinton ran in 1992, anytime we proposed a new spending idea, and we had plenty of them, we combined it with a program to reinvent government so that money would be spent better. Simple thing to do, but we tend not to do it. Next, I think it's really important, and this is important, particularly after Trump, to restore our role in the world. I mean, it's important to keep us safe, and it's important to keep us prosperous. You know, the way to deal with the world economy is not to retreat from it, it's to win in it. And it's to prepare our workers to benefit from the world economy. And that's hard, but we have to make a national investment to do it. I believe it's important. I don't believe in being tepid. I believe it's important to challenge the status quo with big ideas. I have a personal favorite that I think the Democrats ought to do that they'll never touch because it's probably a little too risky. I have a Green New Deal that's a little different. My Green New Deal would include eliminating or cutting in half the tax on work, the payroll tax, which now funds Social Security, replacing it with 2 or 3 different options, one being pollution taxes. A carbon tax, I know it's not very popular, but if we're ever going to do anything about global warming, we have to make, we have to put a price on it. I'd also have probably a transfer tax on stock deals, hit people like me, and maybe a wealth tax. And to get even more money than we take out of the payroll tax, I'd add a value-added tax, which every other civilized country has. You can raise more money for Social Security, extend the life of Social Security, which I can't remember, but I think I saw in the next 3 or 4 years is going to go into the red. It won't affect us, but it's going to affect our kids. So, but that's, and I guarantee you, as Senator Moynihan, some of you may remember, always used to talk about why are the Democratic Party taxing work? When we did Social Security, 16 workers paid for every recipient. It's now 2.8 and going down. And think about the payroll tax on small employers. Every time, where most low-income people get their jobs, every time you want to hire a new person, you have a 7.5% surtax, or 6.5%. There's a lot going for it. A lot of people smarter than I am have figured out how to do it, but that's one just thought. And finally, and I think this is really important, and I'm going to end on this, we need to ask people to give something back to their country. This is a community. We all benefit from our common endeavors. If we split ourselves apart, none of us are going to do as well. And, some of you may remember a pollster named Dan Yankelovich, not the Yankelovich poll that we know today, because he sold his company 30 years ago or something, but the real Dan Yankelovich, who I think died recently. And he told me that what led to the Democratic decline after 1968 and the difference between Bobby Kennedy and Ted Kennedy was this idea of reciprocal obligation. You know, the difference between a tough liberal that is what I believe I am, Jack Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, and a soft liberal that says we're just going to give free things to people, is that you ask them to be part of the country and you ask them to do something back. I mean, we did a lot of good things during the Clinton years, but the thing of which I am most proud is AmeriCorps, which has gotten so many young people to serve their country in civilian capacities. And what do they get for it? They get a benefit. They get opportunity because they get a good chunk of their college paid for. And I mean, if I were to do the free tuition deal, which I would never do for most people, but I would say that at a state college, if you get 2 years of service, we'll pay your tuition. I think that's a good deal at a public college. But in any event, it's opportunity, it's responsibility because they have to step up, and it's community because they help their fellow citizens. With that, I will turn the floor over to Sid Booth. And
Somebody you want to have call on?
yeah,
Okay.
I'm making it tough for you here.
You did.
Making it tough for you.
Let me just say as I'm going over, please check your cell phones again and make sure they're off. And would you give Al your name before you speak?
Edwin Nell, it's great to see Al and Ginger here.
Great.
So among the present vast array of Democratic candidates, could you give us more than one who might be some of these characteristics? It's going to be,
There's the $64.
Okay, let me, I didn't hear that. Does that help?
Yes.
Well, you know, there are a lot of them, I think, that could do this. I mean, Joe Biden, who I told somebody I first asked to run for president in 1983, but that sort of defines his problem. You know, he certainly would fit that. I've always been fond of Cory Booker. I think he's a terrific could be a terrific candidate. I like Kamala Harris. I think she has, the question for her is whether in the end she has the confidence to take what she really believes to the people. Because if she does, she'll win. And just give you an example of what I'm talking about. You know, with the debate, the moderators do their reflexive. Everybody raised their hand if you're for ending private insurance. She raised her hand.
Yeah.
Now, she had said the same thing in her announcement, and the next day she backtracked. She raised her hand. And the next day I saw her on Morning Joe or one of those places, and she was trying to say, well, I misunderstood the question. Pretty hard question to misunderstand. And so that's the only thing that gives me pause. She has the toughness. I think she has the charisma. So I've liked her, and I think she's performed well. You know, I'm not a Bernie Sanders fan. I'm not particularly a fan of Elizabeth Warren, but I will say this about her. She has run an idea-based campaign.
Yeah.
And you can disagree with her ideas. We were talking earlier about some people I fought really hard, like Ronald Reagan, in my political life. And now that I'm teaching a class and I have to teach about him, I've gone back and looked at some things about him. And I still disagree with a lot of his policies, but interviewing the people who developed them, the thing that is clear is that he did what he thought was in the best interest of the country. And that's what you can't say about this president. You just can't say about this president. So, you know, she probably, I think she'd be it'd be harder for her to win. But Mayor Pete, I mean, I like him, he's mayor of my hometown. Of course, I was gone before he was born. And he's been a great mayor. We have this little group called the New Deal, which a couple of the people who work for me started to nurture state and local officials. He's been part of it since the beginning. I think highly of him, you know, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I just think, given the path we have to go to victory, it's going to be hard for him as a 37-year-old gay man to win in those states, industrial states, with a lot of old white guys. But he's talented. He's very talented, and you know, he's been okay. If I left anybody out, this is.
Amy.
Oh, Amy. I love Amy Klobuchar. I really do. And maybe if Biden fades, and I don't think that is an impossibility. I mean, I guess this is off, well, it's off the record, but there's nothing off the record in these days, so I have to be a little bit careful. But maybe she can step up and take that position in the center. I was talking to an important person in this congregation last week who was very favorable toward Michael Bennett. I like Michael Bennett. He's a great school superintendent. Makes me feel like really old because I work with his dad. Many of you probably know his dad, Doug Bennett. And I like him. But I don't know, we'll just have to see. I mean, maybe somebody will sneak up and, I don't think it's gonna be Tom Stoddard, though. It might be. Where's Sydney?
Wait,
Oh, there you are.
excuse
You're
me.
right on target. Now
How'd you
that,
know that? Yeah, I got a question.
yeah,
Well, first a comment.
yeah.
What's your name?
Nay.
Oh, Phil Fell, and it's too hard for me to stand up. Besides, it's less of a target this way. I think a lot of people forget that most of this free stuff was not introduced by a Democrat. He was an independent, but not a Democrat. He is still not a Democrat. Name is Sanders. And, you know, people have to remember that. My question is, what would you consider a Biden-Harris ticket with Elizabeth Warren a key position in the cabinet?
Done.
I'm glad you made that point about Bernie, because Bernie has been sort of a gadfly his whole career, got on cable TV, and you know, but there's a really important lesson in Bernie that applies to 2020. And that is, if you have a candidate you can beat up on the other side, you can do much better than expected. And Hillary, who's been my friend forever, who we traveled internationally together, you know, for whatever reason, fair or unfair, was easy to beat up on. And Bernie did it and became competitive. I mean, there's no reason a 75, in those days, 74-year-old guy from Vermont who was in ne'er-do well all his life should be able to take on one of the most accomplished women in the history of the world. But he did. And, you know, and then Trump. He's not a Democrat. But anyway, on your ticket, it'd be a good ticket for me.
Is it possible for a woman to win?
Yes,
You sure?
yes, sure. Yes. I mean, you know, we had a woman who should have won, and would have won if she'd had a different travel schedule and the campaign staff thought it was important to stand for something instead of looking at all the numbers. Or if she'd listened to her husband on this one, on political strategy. But if she, just think if she'd gone to Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania 3 or 4 more times, she would have won.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wherever you want.
Hi, Livia Bardeen. I'm going to ask you to connect the dots. You said two things which were not associated with each other during your, I was hoping you would do this. One is you said in order to defeat Trump, we have to show him up for what he is.
Yeah.
And then two, you said we have to campaign on ideas. So how are you going to do both of those things?
Well, what I said is, in order to beat Trump, we have to make this election a referendum on Trump. And we do need to campaign on ideas, but they can't be on ideas that he's going to be able to ridicule and that most Americans won't support. If we had a good, solid economic program, if we had, a solid education program, if we, really focused on expanding Obamacare, which now is more popular than it ever was, so it would get better coverage, and if we had a sensible program, the most important part about healthcare, incidentally, is to get healthcare costs down. I mean, sensible ideas would do fine. We had a national service program like Mayor Pete just suggested. We do fine. What I mean by we need to have an idea campaign, because if you don't stand for anything, that's another reason people don't support you. Think about this last campaign. I do this with my students occasionally, who are graduate students and smarter than I am, which is a big problem. But what if I asked you what was the defining idea of Hillary's campaign, you'd say, she had a lot of good policies. I agree with most of them. What was the defining idea of Trump's campaign? The wall. And it's a dumb idea, but think about that electorate he was talking to. It talked right to him, and it said a lot of things. And it was a defining idea. In 1980, when I was in the White House and Ronald Reagan took my job, he had a defining idea. It was the tax cut. Bill Clinton had a defining idea. It was ending welfare as we know it. Those things, so people got a sense of who you are. And, Trump told them who it was, and unfortunately there are enough people in a lot of states who decided that's okay. But it won't be this, as long as we don't give him a target with our ideas, I think he has very little chance of winning. Where should we go next? We're going back. I'll go to David.
Where are you pointing?
Mike? David Wentworth.
yeah, David Wentworth.
No.
Wait, Mike?
David Wentworth. Al, when you were talking about what's important, obviously being Trump and holding the House, you didn't say anything about the Senate. Do I infer from that you think it's a given that the Senate will stay Republican?
No, I don't think it's a given. To be honest with you, I haven't really focused on all the Senate races, and I think the map favors the Republicans this time. Maybe a little bit, a lot more Democratic seats up. The Senate is harder, though. Look, if we win, if we have the kind of vote in 2020 we had in 2018, we will win the Senate. The Senate, we had 3 or 4 candidates who were in states that were just brutal. Joe Donnelly in Indiana, Heidi Heitkamp in South Dakota, even Claire McCaskill in Missouri. I was in Chicago during the campaign, watching all the Donnelly ads, and he was dying because Trump was so popular in Indiana. He was trying to explain how he voted for Trump. You can't do that and win, but he couldn't have won any other way. But that doesn't mean there aren't a lot of seats we could win. But we just had the seats we needed to hold in 2018 were just impossible. And so I think there's a chance of winning the Senate, but it won't be easy because it's a state-by-state election, and our presidential candidate has to win these states. But We won a lot more governorships in 2018 too, and that helps. I'm happy to go anywhere. I see Sid, and I don't want to make him.
Go to that side.
Let's go to this side, because you got my back during that.
Thank you. Dave Katzman. Firstly, 2 questions. Robert Mueller will be speaking a week from today. Do you think he'll be effective in convincing independents, people who haven't made up their mind, that he'll have specifics that will influence them? And secondly, coming back to the Senate, of the 34 seats that are up, I believe 22 are held by Republicans.
Yeah.
People like Beto O'Rourke, Hickenlooper, Bullock, the Speaker of the House in Maine,
Yeah.
McGrath, Amy McGrath, do you think any of them have a chance? Thank you.
On the Mueller question, you know, I just think we put, I mean, I did this too, so I'm as guilty as anybody. We just put too much hope in that. And I think we've gotten an indication from the way he's behaved in the release that he's not gonna go beyond his report. I mean, just an aside, if, this is hard to do, I won't say this, but I mean, I don't have a great aversion to starting impeachment proceedings, but what I really would have liked to have seen our House leadership do, and the House may just have too many power centers to do it, was to do what Senator, I guess it would have been Mansfield maybe did, in Watergate, and appoint a special committee. I mean, having all these Democratic chairmen getting up there screaming for this and screaming for that, it just plays into Trump's hand. I mean, if I were doing it, I'd pick Adam Schiff, who was the most articulate of all of them, and I'd let him run a special committee. I'd have all the other committee chairmen on it, but you have a single spokesperson and do a comprehensive investigation. That's an aside. You know, I think if Hickenlooper ran for the Senate, he'd win, okay? I think Beto is an open question. I mean, everybody was so high on Beto, and it's again how the political press goes after shiny objects. You know, when he gets, what was it, the Harper's cover, was it, you know, Vanity Fair, Vanity Fair. I mean, think about it. He lost to the most unpopular Republican in Texas. He lost. He didn't win. He lost to the most unpopular Republican in Texas. I think he, you know, so could he beat Cornyn? Maybe. I think it'd be a lot harder. The Speaker in Maine, I think there's a pretty good chance we could win that one. I mean, I haven't looked at all of them, but who was the other? Did you? Bullock. Yeah, I think Steve could probably win Montana. I have a special affinity from Montana because we had this great group out there. And in 1992, we went out there and we won Montana. So you can win it with the Democrats. Max Baucus held it for a long time. You won't win it with Bernie Sanders, but you could win it with Bullock. Yes, sir.
Hi, Stu Schwartz. I keep having this vision of looking ahead at the presidential debates and saying to myself, which ones of these Democratic candidates do I feel comfortable with standing up there and throwing back at Trump everything that he's going to throw at them? Am I wrong to put that much emphasis on that as a defining characteristic of someone who should be the nominee?
I think it's very important, actually, that we have somebody who can deal with Trump in the debates. I thought, until this last debate, I thought Joe Biden could do that. I don't know, some of you watched Biden a long time. I said to Ginger during that debate, you know, he slipped.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been with Biden and you couldn't shut him up for 3 hours. For him to say that his time is up, he never said Andy's wife.
What was that about?
I think he was under, I mean, look, Biden has a very difficult problem in the primaries. It's something I identify with. I'm on his side with on this, but you gotta understand that it's a real problem. And that is that he did things that were right in his time, that were liberal in his time, but as the country changed, in part because of the success he brought about, the party's changed on those issues. And, you know, let's take NAFTA, okay? I'll do 2 things, NAFTA and crime, because these drive me crazy. Being responsible for both, or a big part of both. NAFTA was unbelievably successful. In the decade after NAFTA, we created 23.5 million new jobs. Incomes went up across the economy. Inequality lessened for the only decade except for the 1960s. And, you know, so 25 years later, does it need to be modernized? Yes. But you don't have to say it was a failure. You don't have to sort of, you know, I mean, that drove me crazy in the last campaign. Why can't you say that, you know, this is great success, it was aimed at a particular set of problems in 1992, it helped solve those problems, and now it needs to be modernized. The crime bill. And there are some things in it that probably shouldn't have been in it, but the core of that crime bill came at a time where crime was 3 times more important to the American voters than any other issue. No issue was close. Where in big cities, you couldn't do business because it was so unsafe. And for those of you who said, I still get the Chicago Tribune because I bleed purple for Northwestern and I gotta have local coverage. What was the headline in the Tribune day before last? Biggest story was the new mayor, African-American lesbian mayor, not Rahm Emanuel, and the police chief, African-American, talking about the gun violence over the 4th of July and complaining that judges were letting the perpetrators get back on the streets too quickly. Now that's a different issue than the incarceration issue and the criminal justice reform. But it's, for a lot of people, it's not unrelated. And it's a different thing. I mean, because of the crime bill, in part, because we changed, for as bad as it still is in some places, we changed the whole nature of policing in America and made it community policing. Crime went down in every city. It's gone down consistently. And now we can have criminal justice reform. But it didn't mean Biden was wrong. Most of the Black Caucus voted for the crime bill in '94. It just, you know, but Biden has a hard time, every candidate, Hillary had a brutal time in trying to explain that, and it's hard, and maybe that just means it's time for a new generation. So, anyway. Did I get, I think I got, the question about the debates, yeah, it's important, I think Biden can. I worry, I mean, what I worry about somebody like Sanders is that he'll just go so crazy that he'll be an easy target for ads and everything else. I worry about Elizabeth Warren. Her response on the Pocahontas stuff did not give me, did not make me feel that she could handle that particularly well. You know, maybe, you know, you make mistakes early in campaigns, and as I said, I'm impressed by her issue-oriented campaign. I don't know, I mean, I think a lot of them could, but it is very important.
I'm going to take the question myself, Al.
Okay.
Just a comment. In hearing some of these candidates one-on-one,
have been very impressed with them individually. You throw them into the food fight of the debate, it's really a very difficult way for us to make a decision. Now, here's my question. If I'm not mistaken, the Democratic left, real left, has been your hair shirt your entire career. Do you see a path for maintaining an inclusiveness in the party and ditching them so they don't mess up the whole thing?
Well, first of all, a couple of things. Yeah, of course there's a path. I mean, Obama walked it, Bill Clinton walked it. We didn't lose liberal votes. Hillary got more very liberal votes than Sanders did. But it doesn't mean you have to sit out there with a target saying, shoot me with your ideas. Your point about listening to them individually and then on the debate is something I meant to mention at some point. Why, I did the slide that said how different the primary election is than the general election. Right? You got 20 candidates. You got 3 or 4 who have reasonable numbers, but all of them are soft. And everybody else is trying to get that foothold. Because we have the craziest rules for nominating that allow you, I don't know what the threshold is now, but it's always pretty low. You don't have to get more than 10 or 15% to get delegates. The strategy of each candidate is to get a foothold with a particular constituency on a particular issue, and that makes you more extreme. That's the primary strategy. And so they get together and they want to say, well, we may all be pro-choice. I'm more pro-choice than you. I want abortion before conception. And that's what happened to Kamala Harris on health care. She knows she's not going to go out and say to 70 million Americans, 85% of Americans who are happy with their health insurance, that I'm going to take your health insurance away. I'm going to make you go to some bureaucrat to get your pay. I mean, but when they're in that debate, they've got to stand out, and you don't stand out by being sensible, or by talking to rational people. What you want to get are that most, the most intense activists to be on your side, because they'll go out and work in those primaries. What was it? I can't remember the exact number, but 7% of all Democrats have been at a demonstration or a protest. But I guarantee you, 40% of the people who are in the Iowa caucuses have. And so, you're aiming at a different audience, and that's the danger. We both had a friend named Richard Andrew Gebhardt, who I went to school with at Northwestern, and who, a dear friend of mine, and he wanted to run for president in 1988. And he did. And I said to him, if you run, you got to run in a different way, because you're going to lose if you run in the same way. But, and I gave that advice to a lot of people, some of whom didn't run and some of whom did and lost. And finally, we came along with Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton had, probably because he was a governor and he'd seen how things work, which is an important thing. We need more governors, right? We need more governors. Bill Clinton had the confidence that he could talk you into anything. And so we set a course. We weren't perfect, and for those of you who read the book or seen the movie, you'll see that there were a few deviations, but basically we stayed on course from the day we announced to the day we were elected. And it was a strategy that we believed would win the primaries and win the general election. But that takes a lot of confidence, because you gotta take a lot of flack in your own party. And a lot of people don't do it, and from the loudest voices, I mean, look at what's happening to Nancy Pelosi. I've never heard anybody accuse Nancy Pelosi of being a conservative. She represents the most liberal district in the country. I used to fight her all the time, but, you know, she has the greater good of the party and the country at heart. She's no longer just a representative from San Francisco. She is the Speaker of the House of the United States of America, and she wants to fulfill that responsibility. But that's the problem in a sense. You're encouraged in the primaries to get a small, intense vote, because that'll keep you in the race, and it'll also probably get you money, but it doesn't help you in general. Okay.
Hi, I'm Helen Schwartz. I have a question about
Hi.
one of the, apparently, one of the obstacles to getting in the next debate is that you have a certain amount of money. And I think correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was Obama who really pushed individual contributions. And with the internet, that, you know, crowdfunding is a whole new ballgame. And what are the big fat cats doing? I mean, it's possible for someone to say, I'm not going to take money from the big donors. I don't hear a lot of people saying that. So what are the big donors doing?
Contributing.
Yeah,
But you raise a really important point, which I don't have anything to do with this anymore. And I must admit my efforts at reforming the process for nominating have never been quite successful. In 1981 with Jim Hunt, Jerry Ferraro, and Phyllis Long, and Mo Udall, and a few others, we created the super delegates because we said, these party leaders will have the party interest at heart, and they won't just go with the nutcases in their districts. And you know what they did? They went with the nutcases in their districts. So I'm not very good at that. And I haven't really looked at all the criteria, but it's hard, but it is hard to separate out. But it's sort of outrageous, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't like using money. I don't like using clicks on the internet as your, or whatever it is, which is essentially what the money is these days, for deciding who can be on the debate. I think it's outrageous that a governor, Steve Bullock, didn't get on the debate. He's won statewide in a Republican state. I mean, my God, we got to put him center stage. But I've also had experience with this. One of the things we always used to do was do primary debates when I was at the DLC. And for those of you who want to try to do that, it's bad business. Because you have a policy conference, you get all these fat cats and other people to come, and they'll spend time, and they get to meet members of Congress, and they'll give money. Nobody wants to contribute money to a debate where they're not going to ever meet the candidates because they're going to come in and out. And but anyway, we did 3 of them in 1988, a long time ago, when we used to have to put together our own TV networks. I used to have to call every public broadcasting station in the country and say, will you cover this? And we'd do the feed. We'd have to pay for the feed. But anyway, at one of them, there was a Democratic candidate who wanted to appear, and we didn't want him to appear. His name was David Duke. And I'll bet you I'm the only one in this room who's ever faced down David Duke in court. He sued me, and Bob Strauss and every other Democratic form, and we had all our all the best legal talent in New Orleans defending us, and he was there with his, you know, sleazy sidekick Ralph Forbes. But you know, it took us a day to get him thrown off the debate because it's hard to get criteria that you can really argue were fair. I mean, you know, 1% in the national polls. I mean, 1% are mistakes. It used to be if you know, under 14%, you considered it a mistake. But, you know, so it's hard, the answer is it's hard to do, but 20 candidates is pretty hard to have debates.
I think we have time for one more question.
All right, whatever you want. I'm happy, I'm here.
John Hirschman, I was wondering, you have any thoughts as to how important it is for the Democrats to wind up the nominee selection process early rather than let it drift all the way till next July in convention time, so there's more time for the party to come together? And I guess a related question is, do you think it's going to be hard or easy for the 19 or however many that aren't on the top of the ticket to get behind the ticket?
Well, I guess I think on the last question, I think most of the candidates will get behind them. I mean, I think the only one who will really try to negotiate, as he did last time, is Bernie. But he's not a Democrat, so he doesn't instinctively want to get behind the party. So I don't think that's a problem. You know, I have mixed feelings about whether it's important to get it over early. I mean, I think you'll have a natural attrition, and that attrition will become very fast after the next set of debates. I mean, you know, it's hard to sustain money even on the internet if you don't have if you don't have any promise of going anywhere. You know, I guess it's better to get it solved early than late. But to me, if we have a candidate who has a compelling agenda and can rally people around it, Democrats have, you know, I think Tom Etzel had a piece in the Times today saying Donald Trump is probably the only way we're going to unify the Democratic Party. And you know, I don't worry about coming together. I don't think this is like the Vietnam War, where, you know, anti-war people are going to stay home and cost Hubert Humphrey the election. I mean, George Wallace probably cost Hubert Humphrey the election, really, when you think about it. But I don't really think it's that kind of situation. I think everybody in the end wants to get rid of Trump. So I don't think turnout is going to be the problem. And going, I guess, to Sid's question about the left, I mean, there's some people who are going to vote for you no matter what you do. And I'm not saying you should ignore them, but you can't just talk to them. Because the people, you know, who won those House seats? A lot of the women and veterans who won them were in districts where their key vote were suburban women who would ordinarily vote Republican. And they hate Donald Trump. What we don't want to do to them is give them a reason to say, maybe I know now why I've not been voting for Democrats. You know, and that's what Nancy Pelosi is really all about. So I don't think getting the party to come together is going to be a problem. But I do, as you look at that path in that first map across the Midwestern states with that have voting or electorates that are not necessarily, you know, kind to Democrats ordinarily, we've got to make sure that the people who hate Trump will feel that they can pull the Democratic lever. If we do that, we'll get him bad. So anyway, I don't think it's a big problem.
Al, I jumped the gun. We do have a couple more minutes.
I'm Randy Braverman. You had mentioned the importance. You had mentioned the importance of having basically a tagline. You know, war on poverty, change the welfare state as we know it, whatever. What would you say would be your thoughts for what maybe 1, 2, or 3 options would be for the candidate?
Well, my would be fine if I could do it. Simply, we're going to honor work again in America. We're going to honor hard work. and we're gonna quit taxing work. And I look at the payroll tax, I make ordinary income and capital gains the same rate. I mean, I basically say, in my administration, we're gonna value work as much as we're gonna value wealth. And it's a populist message, but I also think another corollary message is that we're gonna ask something of you. We're gonna try, we're gonna, in my administration, we're gonna give you every opportunity to get ahead. But you have a very important responsibility, which is take advantage of that opportunity and give something back to your country. That's what I'd say.
I'm for you. I'm Barbara Diskin. I wish I could see us getting away from so much wealth and let's try saving the planet.
Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Maybe it's not on.
Not on. Close to your mouth.
Okay. I wish we could talk less about money and more about saving the planet for our grandchildren. Nobody seems to be really focusing on that. Is that because so many people don't believe it's a problem?
Well, Jay Inslee's running his whole campaign on it. But look, it is an incredible problem. And I think the reason that people aren't talking about it, my guess is there's a lot more talk about it on the campaign trail than we see on the news, because the reporters all want to focus on the shiny object. And, talking about the environment and talking about global warming doesn't get people revved up, because Trump's leaning in another direction. But I also think it's important that we, and I'm not an expert on this, so it's really, you gotta understand that. We need to have a policy that I say, in my rules, when I tell my classes, the policy has to follow 3 rules. First, it has to make sense. So somebody who listens to it can say, yeah, that makes sense. Secondly, it needs to make a first good impression, because once you make a bad impression, you have to work awfully hard to change that. And third, I always like to create my own playing field, so I argue my proposal on my grounds and not the other guys. And I think the Green New Deal, while it might be meritorious in intention, has one of the unexpected consequences is that it's made it harder to talk about the environment in a sensible way. Because people don't believe you can achieve the goals, and you probably can. People, don't think we can give everybody a job just by snapping your fingers. All this stuff, it's what happens, I hate to say it, when you have somebody who is so inexperienced. The leak of those talking points on the Green New Deal have forever defined it and made a lot of people very reluctant to get near it. Now, I hope one of the candidates grabs onto that issue. And it's an opportunity. I've known Jay Inslee since he was in Congress. He's a nice man, but he's not going to be president. And so, he's probably not the person that ought to be the spokesman for one of the more important issues we face. But, we got to do something about it. We just moved from the bay because we didn't want water coming up in our backyard 5 times a year. So we moved downtown in Annapolis. So now we have it coming up to the balcony in our. But anyway.
Al, time has expired.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. We have several on